trauma. This presentation is part of the social justice initiative of Division 43, and if you're not familiar with Division 43, this is a society of couple and family psychology. And the society promotes a systemic approach to psychological treatment and to some of the major issues, clinical issues that we encounter in our work, not only with couples and families, but also with individuals. And we emphasize the importance of relationship and relational factors and their impact on mental health at the individual level as well as relational level. And that's what we want to emphasize today. So this symposium will present the work that we do in the area of immigration and also incarceration. Unfortunately, the third author, Michael Baglieri, is sick and he's not able to attend the convention, so we won't hear from him and his work on couple violence. What I'd like to do first is introduce the notion of relational trauma and explain how we think of trauma relationally. And the DSM-5, if you go back to the DSM-5, in the DSM-5, trauma is defined as repeated or extreme exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. And really the focus is on the nature of the event rather than the individual experience and the perception of the event. The focus is on the nature of the event rather than the individual experience or the perception of the event. And other life events that may be experienced as traumatic. They're extremely upsetting, at least temporarily overwhelms the individual's internal resources and produces lasting psychological symptoms. So that's how it's defined in the DSM. This symposium will show that individual experiences of incarceration, immigration can be labeled as traumatic, whether they involve actual or threatened death, injury, or sexual violence. Specifically, the presentations will look at individual experiences of incarceration, immigration, and interpersonal violence as trauma that occurs in the context of family relationships. And the presentations will highlight the relational effects of the traumatic stress. The concept of relational trauma refers to the multidimensional dimension of trauma and its impact on both individual and relational functioning. What we're looking at here is trauma as a shared and relational experience that influences the functioning of individual as well as couple and family systems. Individual responses to traumatic events such as depressive symptoms, anxiety, or substance use influence interactions between family members as they accommodate to the symptoms and develop new patterns of relating that may contribute to maintain individual and relational distress. So trauma is a shared experience when family members show signs of individual distress in response to traumatic stress, also called secondary trauma symptoms. It is a relational process that influences interpersonal dynamics and the quality of relationships as individuals act out the internal working models of self and others they form from their experience of traumatic events. Because trauma is profoundly relational, it calls for a relational systemic approach to psychological assessment and intervention. The presentations that follow will discuss how to use a relational systemic lens to treat trauma in diverse populations. We will begin with a discussion of the trauma experienced by undocumented immigrants in the US, followed by an examination of trauma and resiliency among justice-involved families. So I'm going to call Martha Hernandez to the podium. Is that how you call it? And she will give her presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. So as Corinne mentioned, I'll be talking a little bit about unauthorized immigration and how to work with them from a systemic approach. Before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about worldwide, it's well known that there's about 71 million individuals that are displaced currently, meaning that they are forced out of their homes over time. These individuals will then move into neighboring cities or countries, and what that means for us is that many times they are coming into the US, right? So we have almost 11 million. These are the numbers from 2017, and these numbers just came out recently. We have actually seen, despite what we hear in the news, Mexicans are no longer the largest number of unauthorized individuals coming into the US. This number has now increased by Central American and Asian countries, and we've seen the largest group be from India, which I don't think we always think of as immigrants coming into the US. We still see that Mexicans are the largest undocumented total that are currently in the US, but their increase coming into the US over the years has actually decreased. So they're not coming in at the same level that they were before. And part of it has just been the political climate that we're currently in. Why is this important for us? I think it's important for us to understand that that means that we need to know the populations that are coming into the US. I think we focus so much on the Latinx population that now we have to expand and utilize what we know to other populations as well. Currently, we know that there are 6, on this side you kind of see the map, of increases and decreases. Undocumented individuals are, about 58% of them are within 6 states in the US. And so California being one, Illinois is on that list, as well as Texas, New York, New Jersey, and Florida. But as you can see, those states actually have a decrease. So all these light grayish neutral colors are a decrease. And these are the increases. So we're starting to see an increase in other states. And so if you're living in one of those states, it's important to learn, right, what populations are coming into your state so you can start learning about that culture and how to identify them. We're also starting to see an increase. This is the line here of individuals that are coming and staying in the US for longer than 10 years. The average time for an undocumented individual in the US is 15 years. We imagine that this number is A because of the fact that a lot of undocumented individuals have been asked to leave and deported within the last couple of years. And so they're not coming in at the same amount. And then also that this number increases due to a lot of individuals who have come in legally with a visa and overstayed that visa. So they're not coming in ways that we hear in the news on a regular basis. When you conceptualize and when you meet a client, it's absolutely important to look at the 4 stages of migration when working with individuals who are undocumented. We talk about pre-migration, during migration, and post-migration. Post-migration being 2 different variables. So the continuing experiences that individuals face, and then the conditions in the actual host country. We know that many individuals leave their countries of origin due to poverty, due to torture, abuse, political disarray, which then actually increases family separation, right? And I'll go through each of these and how they look within a case. And then during transit, we hear about different ways and stresses that our individuals are impacted. And so that can be the limited resources of food, water, hygiene, things of that sort, as well as witnessing death and abuse or trauma and experiencing it themselves. Once they arrive in the US, and the reason that this is separated into 2 categories for the post-transit is really that there's the component of things that are kind of chronological, not that they're chronic for them, and then also the individual pieces that happen at home. So we see a lot of changes. They might have a doctorate in their country of origin, and they get here, and they no longer can continue to work under that doctorate. So not only does that impact their social economic status, it also impacts kind of their status at home. There's a lot of shifts that occur, so if their child learns the language a lot quicker than they do, right, the child now has a higher power than potentially their parent does. So you want to look at all of those different situations. And so before we get into the relational piece, I think it's important to know how each of these stages then impacts the individual in relation to others. So individually, we see an increase, and all this research kind of shows acculturation stress is huge. How well does somebody adjust? How well does somebody take in the culture? And does it cause distress? For some individuals living in a pocket with others that are from their country of origin is no problem. So acculturation stress isn't difficult. For others, it can really increase other symptoms of substance abuse, PTSD, anxiety, depression, and unfortunately in the last few years we've seen an increase in suicidal ideation. And a lot of that is due to the conditions that they're receiving a lot of feelings of hopelessness that things aren't going to get better. I'm from California. In California, somebody can put in for what's called a U visa, and it is taking 7 years before they get a call back. Okay? I don't know how you maintain hope for 7 years, right? And so what we know with that is that there are many, many barriers as to why they don't come into our offices. And so we're asking, they're having all of these conditions, why aren't they seeking services? And so it's important to know for you that by the time they make it to your office, they have gone through a tremendous amount to be able to get there, okay? And so a lot of times their unauthorized status leads to their fears. And I separated those 3 fears intentionally. There's the fear of deportation. If I walk outside, am I going to run into a Homeland Security truck? The fear that if I go to a clinic, am I going to be discriminated against because I don't speak English? The fear of being misunderstood. When I share my story, are they actually going to understand what I'm saying and what I've gone through? And so I think it's really important to understand that they've had to talk themselves through all of this, on top of the limited resources, so financial stability, right? Therapists and therapy is expensive. Do they have childcare so that they can get to your office? Is there a bus line that can take them there? I've had clients have to take 2 buses to get to me when I worked in LA. That was a good 2-hour ride to my office and a 2-hour ride back. It's not easy. The lack of knowledge. They might not know that there are resources for them. And then language barriers. I could do a whole other presentation on the need for bilingual clinicians and how to really meet the needs of our families and individuals that come in. And so with this, unfortunately, on an individual level, we have the psychological impact and the barriers to resources, and this leads to a lot of mental health needs gone unmet. And so when they get into relationships, it creates more problems. And so I'm going to share a quick case on Maria. She was about 34 years old, coming in. I do immigration evaluations. She came in for an evaluation for asylum. And so in the US, if you don't apply within a year for an asylum, you have to prove why you waited for so long. She came in when she was 7 or 8. So when you're 7 or 8, the fact that your parents didn't apply for you is not a good enough excuse. Okay, so they send them in to get a psych evaluation. She came in questioning, when I saw her, her gender identity as well as her sexual identity. And when I started my assessment, I have to go through each of these, and I would encourage you to also go through it, even if you're doing an intake or you're seeing a client on an individual basis. And the ones that are bolded are the ones that are really specific to our relational trauma. So I'll give you a little bit of a quick synopsis without a ton of detail, but she explained to me that at a very young age, she knew she was different. She knew that she was attracted to women, and that she felt like just maybe she was a boy. She still used pronouns of she and her, but she felt like she might be a boy. When her mom found out that she had kissed a girl at 7 years old, she told her dad. And it was at the same time that her grandfather, her paternal grandfather, was at the house. The three of them, she described, had a huge argument. Her grandfather grabbed her, took her to his house for the next 3 days, where he proceeded to physically, emotionally, and sexually abuse her. He told her that there weren't be any lesbians in his family, and that she was a disgrace, and that he was going to teach her how to be with a man. There is plenty of documentation of how this happens on a regular basis, unfortunately. In addition to her own sexual, verbal, and physical abuse, she also witnessed intimate partner violence between her mother and her father. And then when she was returned from her grandfather, when she told her parents, they all said that didn't happen, so mom was upset, and mom decided to come to the US and separated her from her father. So she then was extremely confused as to why my father isn't protecting me. During the transit, she said she had a fairly decent transit to the US, and it was mostly her mother's blame and her anger and lashing out at her that it was her fault that her marriage had failed. That it was her fault that she had to come to the US and work, where back in Mexico she didn't have to work. And then that led to her inability to create healthy relationships. She ended up in relationships that really she was physically and verbally abused on multiple occasions. And so what I encourage you to do is A, to think systemically, but also to explore your own values and beliefs on what your thoughts are about immigration. You can't, especially if you're going to do immigration evaluations, you have to try to be objective, and it's very difficult if you lose sight or if you're trying to make sure that everybody gets, asylum or a waiver of a visa. Practicing from a cultural humility standpoint, and also recognizing that each experience is different. Not everybody from Mexico or everybody from Latin America has the exact same experiences. So being able to see the pre, the post, and the during transit time as well. Educating yourself, I think there's a ton of information now out there. Getting comfortable with asking uncomfortable questions. I think just asking if somebody's undocumented creates a lot of anxiety for us. But you can do this during a genogram. You can do it during your assessment. Ask them about their journey. What brought them here? Did they come with anyone? What was that like? Inquiring about, just asking, right? What about since you've been here? Who did you come with? Who did you stay? Any of those questions will tell you who was important to them and what their current conditions are now. In addition to that, there is plenty of evidence-based practices for trauma, but they're all very individualistic. And so what I would encourage you to do is consider adapting those to your clients and families and relationships. I particularly work from a family systems perspective, and I have found that it works tremendously well with trauma victims. Because they're able to kind of get a hold of themselves and who they are and how they want to continue being. Also remembering to use a strength-based approach. I think it's very easy to think that these individuals have so much trauma and pain that they're not going to proceed, and that they have a ton of resiliency by the time they come to your office. Ask about relationships and people who are important in their lives. Who do they leave behind? You have to remember that if they're here undocumented, that means they can't travel back and forth. So if their parent gets sick, they can't go visit. If their parent dies, which I hear over and over, they can't go visit. Think about that grief as well as other areas of stressors. And so some very basic things are finding appropriate languages. Don't use family members to translate for you. There's a little picture of a red card if you're not familiar. I have a ton of them in my office. You can order them. It helps clients know what their rights are. They can carry them with them, as well as creating a safe space. There are plenty of already made safety plans. If a child is born in the US and their parent is picked up while they're at school, we don't want that child to go into the system. So if they have a plan, they have all their documents in one place, that child could potentially be saved from going into the legal system. What are the financial plans? How can they make this work? Individuals are very resilient. We just have to have those very difficult conversations and not avoid and think that we can't help. There's a ton of resources. We've also added a ton of resources to our website, so I encourage you to look at the Division 43 website. And then here are some of our emails. So I encourage you, I know that this is quick, but hopefully a snippet on how to think about some of our undocumented individuals during this time and how you're going to assess when they come into your office.